good evening, and welcome to 2020. Don't you love it when conventional wisdom gets turned in its head? Well, get ready, because over the next few weeks, you're going to be hearing about a surprising new scientific review that challenges much of what we've been told about children and media violence. Experts have been warning for years, exposing kids to violent programs or movies may make them violent, even turn them into child abusers or worse. But have parents been misled? Tom Jarrell takes a hard look at some provocative new thinking about children and violence. Should we really let them watch?
You really want it? Yeah. Oh!
And there's clearly this is funny, and no one's hurt, and it's just they're having a good time.
Really insidious things about these cartoons is that they're funny.
But just as every cigarette you smoke increases the chances that someday you will get lung cancer, every exposure to violence increases the chances that someday a child will behave more violently than they otherwise would.
Alarming statements like that convince Congress to pass new laws, like the one requiring a V-chip in all new TVs, so that parents can block violent programming from their children. But is there conclusive evidence that viewing violence in the media can actually cause violence?
Scientific evidence does not support the view that exposure to media violence causes aggression.
It's all a myth, charges Toronto University psychology professor Jonathan Friedman. In a new 481-page scientific review, he trashes the claim of some of the nation's most respected public health groups, an often repeated claim that more than 1,000 studies prove the case against media violence.
There aren't over 1,000 studies. There are about 200 studies, give or take a few, depending on which ones you count.
Over the past 15 years, Friedman analyzed every study on media violence published in English. His verdict? The scientific evidence doesn't prove much of anything.
Some of it is really silly, like one study, the worst, I suppose. The measure of aggression is you ask a kid, a young boy or girl, if I had a balloon, would you pop it? And if they say yes, that's aggression. That's totally ridiculous.
And now Friedman has a new ally in this culture war.
I came across one study that had exposed children to Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood and Sesame Street and found that they had 3 times as much aggression afterward as before.
Pulitzer Prize-winning science author Richard Rhodes also investigated the link between violent media and violence in society.
There is no good evidence that watching mock violence in the media either causes or even influences people to become violent. And there's some evidence that it makes people more peaceful.
Not according to these two men, who helped lay the foundation of the case against media violence, Leonard Eron and L. Raoul Huseman, both psychology professors at the University of Michigan. In 1960, Eron began studying aggression and the TV viewing habits of 875 third graders in upstate New York. And he and Huseman kept tracking some of those children until they were age 30. They concluded that the 8-year-olds who watched more violent television were more aggressive. But when Professor Huseman speaks, Congress listens. They certainly did way back in 1986, when the Senate was debating the V-chip.
You expose children to film clips, TV shows with violence in it, and they behave more violently and aggressively immediately afterwards.
The fact is, to base the V-chip, as really Congress did, on this finding, is just the most basic sort of fraud. Fraud.
Who's right? Who's wrong?
Now, your study that also was funded by the Motion Picture Association of America, doesn't that taint your results?
I think any reasonable person would say, I've been saying the same thing for 15 years. I've said it over and over and over again, and no one has funded it. And now I've come up with exactly the same conclusion.
What's the bottom line of Professor Friedman's controversial review?
The scientific evidence does not support the view that exposure to media violence causes aggression. So anyone who believes that, based on the scientific evidence, should not believe it.